Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our friends and colleagues joining this event from Europe and from Africa and from across the world, of course. I bring you warm greetings from Accra, Ghana, and it is truly an honor to moderate this very important event. We have on board an amazing set of speakers who have taken the time to share great insights with us at what seems to be the first of its kind student engagement ahead of the South African Union and European Union Summit happening in Brussels, Belgium. The South AU Summit comes at a very crucial time as the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over. The economic conditions are still hit by uncertainty, and the climate crisis remains an ever-present threat looming in the background. The All-Africa Student Union, the European Student Union, and the Global Students Forum believe that the relations between the African and Europe continents must be based on a partnership of equals, based on dignity, mutual respect, and recognition of the legacy of the past. Now, ahead of the 6th AU Summit, the two regional student unions, that is the All-Africa Student Union, that is the All-Africa Students Union, and then the European Student Union, and their members, that's the National Student Union, in unison with the Global Students Forum, have produced a declaration, that is a student declaration, which highlights 7 key areas, which include investments in education, international mobility, fostering the knowledge of Africa in Europe, vaccine justice, brain drain, digital inclusion, and then the engagement of civil society under the AU-EU partnership. Now, we are of the solemn conviction that these areas require urgent attention and action to ensure that we are able to ensure social justice and bridge the economic gap that have existed over the years. Now, the declaration will obviously would be shared later after this event. However, it's also important to highlight that this is going to be co-signed and agreed on by the regional student unions and the national student unions from both continents. And if you're a national student union on this platform or a regional student union on this platform from any of these two continents, and you are willing to engage further on this declaration, you can send an email after this event to either the Global Students Forum or to any of the student unions, that's the All-Africa Student Union or the European Student Union, to be a part of this very important declaration. Now, delving into this session that we are hosting today, it seeks to, one, provide knowledge on how student union leaders across Africa and Europe can engage and influence their governments on the EU-AU partnership. And secondly, to also increase your awareness, or the student unions and then student awareness and understanding of the EU-AU partnership, including the policy frameworks, initiatives, and programs that it encompasses. So today we have an interesting lineup of speakers from both continents who I would say have been involved in some of the initiatives under the AU-EU partnership, whether directly or indirectly. And it's going to be interesting to hear from them some of the insights that they will share about some of the partnership. And ahead of the EU Summit, the 6th AU-EU Summit happening from 17th to 18th February, some of the things that they expect for the leaders from both continents to act on, some of the commitments that they expect to see, and I mean, largely to also again talk about, I mean, the thoughts of student leaders about the AU-EU Summit and what is expected ahead of time. So we have today the Director General for Education, Youth, Sports and Culture of the European Commission, of the European Union Commission, that is Madam Director General of Fairness, Christofidou. And then we also have Professor Goski Alabi, the President of the African Council for Distance Education, and also the President of the Lawe Open University. And then we also have Martina Damani, who is the President of the European Students' Union, and also His Excellency Peter Kwesi-Koji, the Secretary General of the All Africa Students' Union, and then Mr. Michael Gibel, the Director of the Higher Education Policy Unit at the European Union, European University Association. And of course, after the discussions that will go on, we'll come back to you again, the audience, to put in some few questions and comments that would again post, also give some feedback on them. And then we do the final comments and then wrap up, and then hopefully look forward to more engagements around the declaration that would put out there. So once again, I want to say that it's truly an honor to have you all join in to be part of this very important event, and we are looking forward to further again engaging you on the declaration already made. So by way of commencing, would first have the introductory remark from the Director General of the European Union Commission, or of the Education and Youth and Sports section of the European Union Commission, and then we'll get things starting.
I think, Samuel, that Madam Director General is not here yet, so maybe in the interest of time and using it as well as possible, maybe we start with the first round of the panel, and then make space for Ms. Christofidou when she's here. Would that make sense?
Okay, perfect. That makes perfect sense. So I think prior to the Director General joining, as I've already introduced, we have Professor Goski Alabi, we have Martina Damani, the President of the European Students' Union, and then Excellency Peter Kwesi-Koji, Secretary General of the All Africa Students' Union, and then Mr. Michael Gibel, the Director of the Higher Education Policy Unit at the European University Association. So I think that we'll do a quick round of questions of one general question to our panelists to seek their thoughts on this question, and then perhaps they say hello to all of us. And then once the Director General joins in, we would have her remark, and then we continue with the discussion. So the question is, how do you see the cooperation between Europe and Africa in light of the EU summit? And what do you think will and should be its future developments, especially in the field of higher education? So please, in submitting your thoughts on this, perhaps we would also want to have you also introduce yourself briefly before your submission. So thank you. So we would first invite Professor Goski Alabi to make her submission on this. You have the floor, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to the All African Students Union and also the European Association, Universities Association, and the Students Association as well. I think that the EU has been a very strategic and significant partner of Africa for some time now, particularly in the area of trade and also for higher education when it comes to research, funding of projects, and in particular mobility. We've had Erasmus Mundus, we've had the Marie Skłodowska scholarship, amongst others. So we're looking at discussing what the policy would be with regards to mobility in particular, when it comes to graduate education, particularly PhDs. And we'll talk about some of the policies and the implications probably in the main discussions. But we want to look at whether the policy is going to change towards opening it up and bringing in more digitization, and what would be the next move with the effects of COVID, whether we're going to see some move towards commoditization of higher education in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that quick remark. We'll also quickly move on to Martina Damani, the President of the European Students' Union. Martina, you have the floor.
Samuel, I believe we have been joined by Dr. Temis in the call, so we can proceed with her welcome intervention.
Okay, great. You're welcome, Madam Director General Themis Christophidou. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And since you've joined, we would now take your remark, your welcome address, and then we'll proceed. Thank you so much, and you have the floor, Madam.
I thank you for this opportunity to share with you. I'm very happy to be with you today, even for a short while. Dear friends, the 6th EU-Africa Summit is laying the foundation for a renewed, deeper, and more equitable African Union-EU partnership. A partnership in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, with the European Green Deal, and with the African Union's Agenda 2063. This is a partnership for a better future. And there can be no conversation about the future without the input of young people. Young people who are putting so much effort to educate yourselves and gather the skills we all need to tackle the challenges we commonly face for today and tomorrow. Youth is Africa's and Europe's greatest asset. Excuse me. And this asset's value is multiplied by the ability of each of you to do more. Student organizations play a key role, not only in helping empower young people, amplifying their voice, but also making sure this is a voice for those that would otherwise be unheard. Now, it is the time today now to have an impact. 2022 is the European Year of Youth, a year that, much more than celebrating youth, respects that young people are integral to society. We saw how important your contribution was with COVID-19, as you all suffered so much, also for the sake of vulnerable people. You also had to deal with the difficult situation of being young, less established, less supported, while facing difficult, sudden change. For us at the EU, this year is not just about adding youth to our agenda. Youth is already on our agenda. The year is about further strengthening youth participation so that young people have an impact at all levels of policy, so that your voice is heard today, but has an impact on your future. This is also the year of youth for the African Union-European Union partnership, engaging young people and students in both regions as strategic partners. Your input is crucial for shaping policy at regional level, but also for shaping the partnership you want between our two regions. I said it earlier and I will say it again, there can be no talk of future without your voice. And I'm proud to see the strong ties developing between student communities in our two continents. The European Commission is following your work, and we are deeply supportive of your interregional approach. I see many points of convergence between the priorities of European and African student unions. Equal access to high quality higher education, students' rights and participation, promoting human rights, democratic governance, academic freedom, gender equality. I also hear a powerful echo in the expectations and aspirations of students on both sides of the Mediterranean. You have a deep awareness of the challenges of our time, a sense of responsibility, and a will to fight for the planet. Transforming higher education to better address future challenges is a big point of focus of the European Strategy for Universities that the European Commission announced last month. When I listen to you, European and African student unions, I see how meaningful this is, also at the global level. The European Strategy for Universities features a global dimension and actions for strengthening EU-Africa higher education cooperation. It highlights Africa as a priority region for strengthening international partnerships. And of course, it is supported by some of our best tools like the Erasmus Plus program. Last cycle, from 2014 to 2020, the EU spent overall over 1.5 billion euro to support African education systems. Erasmus Plus alone supported 35,000 student and staff exchanges between 2016 and 2020. And we funded 150 capacity building partnerships between our continents. In this cycle now, from 2021 to 2027, we have an investment package of 3.5 billion euro. This is over half of the EU's external budget for education, dedicated to education in 46 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And we expect to reach 105,000 learning mobilities in this period. The budget allocated to sub-Saharan Africa under the new Erasmus Plus program has risen from 160 million to 570 million euro. This is more than 3 times the budget. Within this amount, over 300 million are allocated to student mobility. And we're complementing it by around another 220 million for the North African countries. I hope, dear friends, that this is a clear signal of our commitment. Erasmus Plus also opened new opportunities in vocational education and training and in digital inclusion. To increase access to and participation in Erasmus Plus, we're currently establishing Erasmus Plus focal points in all African countries. These are in place to provide information and support to applicants and potential participants. And we are engaging alumni to spread the word as well, in particular through the African Students and Alumni Forum. Dear participants, to sum up, all in all, I do see a bright future ahead. The will to do more is there. The talent to do more, you have brought it to the table. All that is left is to continue to push forward together. Thank you and all the best for your works today.
Thank you so much, Madam Director General, for the insights shared. And then again, of course, what is left is for us to push forward and continue to work together in pursuit of a better Africa and Europe in the long run. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us amidst your very busy schedule.
I thank you too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I think with that said, it sets the tone now for our conversation, and to also now again continue to hear from our panelists and to discuss some of the priorities that has already been mentioned by the Director General and as has already also been highlighted in the student declaration. So I would think that at this point, I'll go back again to Martina Darmani with the same question, that how do you see the cooperation between Europe and Africa in the light of the EU-AU summit? And what do you think will and should be its future development, especially in the field of higher education? Martina, you have the floor.
Thank you for the question, Samuel. And I would like to once again thank the All African Students Union for their coordination of this event and our partnership together with the Global Students Forum in bringing such initiatives to life. I'll start off by by first mentioning that any relations between the African and European continents must always be based on the principle of equal partnership. And in no way can these ever be a detriment to the right of the peoples of both continents to autonomously take their decisions. And I feel that it's important to start off by saying this, that only by avoiding neocolonial policies can a truly common vision for the two continents be shaped. And it's this principle then that should guide all other actions, starting off with investments in education. That we are seeing a positive note from the current French presidency of the European Union Council, which indicated that investments in education would be a main tool of cooperation between Europe and Africa. This can bring about many opportunities, and we hope one of them, our key priority, would be student exchange programs, because these are really a key component in ensuring the successful development of higher education over a longer and more sustainable term. And I speak also as a person who benefited from the Erasmus Plus program for my research degree. It really helped in building a sense of understanding and community, and not to mention also then the benefits that came out via the partnerships between the research and higher education institutions. So the proliferation of harmonization initiatives to build trust in the recognition of qualifications gained in Europe and in Africa is really the key to the establishment of an African-European academic mobility scheme. And it's a priority that ESO supports this, and to see cooperation between Europe and Africa truly flourish. But it's not only about having investments and setting up this mobility scheme. There needs to be further elements to ensure that this is working in harmony. First and foremost, it must be based, there must be a basis for building mutual knowledge on each other's history, cultures, and languages. And as well as important, it is the acknowledgement of the colonial past and its long-lasting effects. Secondly, we cannot be truly committed to equal partnership if we are not addressing unjust distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. And here I would like to ask and reiterate ESU's call towards the European Union and African Union Summit to disavow corporate and nationalist monopolies on vaccine production, on its research and its development. This is really important to rebalance vaccine distribution that values people first and profit second. Finally, and in an effort that to prevent as much as possible brain draining countries between the continents, there must be a climate which fosters merit-based employment opportunities, contextualized education systems, and well-structured incentive schemes. So by all of this, I'm highlighting the role of many key actors in our society and in our higher education community. So I truly look forward that we continue this cooperation together with us on the Global Student Forum. Hopefully that the next EU-AU summit would include civil society, would include youth and students, local authorities and parliaments, and more stakeholders at the table to hopefully support the implementation of the commitments we are making. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina, for that detailed insight. So quickly, we'll move on to the Secretary General of the All Africa Student Union. Mr. Koji, you have the floor, sir.
All right. Thank you very much, Samuel. I would want to start by thanking GSF. I would also want to thank ASU. I would thank ESU, particularly because we found an opportunity to show that we can work together. We have indicated that it's very possible that we can look at the commonalities that exist between us and to find a way as to work around them. In the last couple of years, we have come together to do wonderful things. We've worked on campaigns around child labor. We have worked on injustices around brutalities that has been perpetrated by regimes that show that they have a blatant disregard for human rights. And all of these we have done together, showing each other international solidarity. And it is on the basis of that that a conversation such as this one is important. It's important because we get to show that it is very possible that Africa and Europe can treat each other as partners, can treat each other as equals, and can do so on the basis of the fact that, I mean, every human being is created equal and with inalienable rights. So I would also look at it in the context of the question as it has been asked. And so presently, what is the context of the Africa-EU partnerships? And what is desired is that it should be equal. What is desired is that there should be dignity around the partnerships. What is desired are those aspirations that are lofty, such as the respect that we can get when we sit around tables. Presently, it is everything but these things, and they remain aspirations. So, for example, much as this is not a trade dialogue, it is impossible not to talk about trade, because everything is tied back to the economics. If we want to build schools, we want to create access, we want to decolonize education, we want to democratize education, make it accessible to all of these concern funding issues. And so if you look at the current trade calculus between AU and EU, you're talking about something around 70% of the goods that are exported to Africa are manufactured goods from Europe. And then you talk about something around 60% of the goods that are imported into Europe being fundamentally raw materials. If you look at it in that sense, then you're talking about the fact that what flows from Africa into Europe is significantly, higher than what flows from Europe into Africa. Again, you would see that there's a sense that it's unfair, it's uneven, because I've tried to really search to find out Africa, EU, Africa trade data, and you'd realize that majority of what you get is showing EU country level conversations or trade deals. And so you would get the EU signing EPAs with economic partnership agreements with individual countries. And so you'd see the EU signing an agreement with a country like Swaziland, which is less than 1 million and that doesn't have any production capabilities. You'd see the EU signing deals with countries that clearly do not have the mind, do not have the capacity to negotiate with a big weight like the EU. That is uneven, that is unequal, and cannot yield any desired fruits. So, but all these will now sort of veer back into education, because if you cannot get the money, it's clear that you'll not be able to fund all the ideas that would want to do. At the level of mobility, it is Prof. Goski has mentioned that, and Martina has mentioned that, and there's a sense that around the flows, again, what goes into Europe and what comes into Africa, something around 1.3 million of students abroad move from their countries to study elsewhere. Around 10% of that comes from Africa. And there's a reason why the numbers are low, against the background that majority of young people are residents in Africa. If you look at the visa regimes and the inequality with which visas are issued, for example, you would get the sense that when you're coming from Europe to Africa, it's okay and you should be issued. But when you're moving from Africa, regardless of how much you can show that you are really going there to study, the regime is very different. And it means that you do not have an equal opportunity to move from Africa to go into Europe to study. So if we're looking at the status quo, even in terms of mobility, there are a lot more people who are desirable to move. Apart from the visa regimes, there's also the element of comparability of academic qualifications and equivalences. So to what extent is the degree that I earn in Ghana comparable to a degree that is earned in Europe, such that I can transition seamlessly into Europe and continue my education. If it has to be downgraded or it has to be put to a lower level, you can't call that equal. And so on a number of the issues, when you look at ranging from the mobility data, looking at the visa regimes, looking at issues around comparability of qualifications, issues around how we recognize degrees. Just recently, we're having a conversation, for example, like UK. If you want to admit let's say students from Africa or any other part of the world whose first language is English, the operational understanding has always been exempting those whose first language is English to skip the IELTS and other forms of examination. You'd find that not only are we requiring people whose first language, who have been taught English from the crèche level to the tertiary level, to still write the IELTS, but there's a sense that it's been commercialized and the intent really is for profit rather than examining people on the basis of if they even have, the merit to speak and write English properly. That is very unequal. So if we look at majority of the things, you would find that it's that kind of David and Goliath sort of thing. And at the moment, what it is that, to the extent that, it's profitable to some extent, we'll do it. And so for me, this is not like a scripted conversation. This is something that every day when we sit around as ESU, as ASU and all of us, we talk about these things, we have these conversations, and maybe driving it home to the leaders to get a sense that we're finding common ground to work as young people. And we do so on mutual respect. We do so on the basis of dignity. And we do so on the basis of understanding that, there are common problems. So for example, we have worked together on child labor campaigns. And if I look at the impact that our coming together has yielded, it's fundamentally higher than if we decided to go our separate ways and doing them. Again, if you look at how many of our colleagues we've been able to amplify their voices and get them released from prison cells and all that, it is because we've been able to build global solidarity. And so on the wide range of issues, we cannot get anything out if it lacks that fundamental premise of respect, mobility, respect, dignity, and all that. So as an initial remark, those are the issues that I believe should guide the conversations around the Africa-EU summits. It's been going on for as long as from 2000 until now. And there's the sense that if anything at all, it must get better. And for me, I think that the conversation should be guided around mutual respect and the understanding that the people that drive the policy should be able to make sure that they don't only speak it in words, but in deeds, they actually make it work. And so we can go into the subject matter of higher education, how much we want to decolonize it, and how much of an influence comes from the West by way of even African unity and all that. So these are things that we can talk about. And so Samuel, just as an introductory remark, just maybe I would end here, and then when it's a more specific question targeted towards higher education, we'll look at how best the ongoing EU-AU partnerships should work around getting us to have a higher education ecosystem that is very transparent, that is equitable, such that we can compare our qualifications, we can earn our degrees and move into Europe and be recognized at the same level as we would in Africa or elsewhere. Right. So I would want to end here, and then I'm sure that we'll come back.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for that as well. We'll quickly also move on to Mr. Michael Gibel, the head of Education Policy Units, Higher Education Policy Units at the European University Association. So just by way of reiterating the question again, how do you see the cooperation between Europe and Africa in the light of the EU-AU summit And what do you think will and should be its future development, especially in the field of higher education? Mr. Gibel, you have the floor, sir.
Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are, and thank you for the opportunity to join you here. The EUA is the umbrella organization of the European universities. So we have more than 800 universities and university associations across Europe as our members. So it goes beyond the EU. We bring 49 countries together, the countries which are also participating in the Bologna process and in all the policy discussions at European level, be it Bologna or in the EU context, we play a role. I'm delighted to be here also because I've just been thinking back when I listened to Peter, who described the situation as it is. And I've been thinking back, it is about 10 years ago that EUA started its first project with African partners. That was with the Association of African Universities at the time. And ESU was one of our partners on the European side. And we had actually the All African Student Union as a dialogue partner then. And I think these were the first exchanges between the ESU and the All African Student Union. I also make that view back in history, not to take the power out of Peter's concerns and worries and complaints. I think they're all very justified and important that we address that, but just to say that things have changed since that. So when you ask me about expectations towards the summit, the first plus is that higher education is on the agenda. This was not the case some years ago. So we had really to fight for a place for higher education in particular to be considered in the negotiations. Samuel and Martina and also Peter emphasized the equal partnership, and I think I couldn't agree more. And while it is clear that the chances are not equal and that we come from different backgrounds and that there are issues like the decolonization and probably also the concern of neocolonization, the trade differences, and I think nevertheless academic exchanges give you an opportunity not only to work despite these differences, but also to work about these differences and try to contribute to raise awareness and to solving them. That's not a quick shot, as we all know. So following up on what Temis just said is what we will see is more collaboration and mobility, and hopefully not only for education collaboration and student and staff exchanges, but hopefully also funding for research, because I think we all need research and it's important for our societies, and it's also important for the quality of education, for the academic careers, and also for the careers of students in their education. So I think that's one of the hopes that we see, and also where we see that the situation has changed over the years. There's now much more talk about research as well. If I look at what has happened so far, and Temis gave you a record of this, until 2019, this was the latest data that I consulted, the bulk of cooperation between EU and Africa, I mean, under Erasmus, was still with the Northern African countries and very few with Sub-Saharan Africa. But as you heard, the emphasis has changed a little bit. There's a specific budget now for a high budget for Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that becomes more balanced. And what we would hope to see is also that we have more African institutions, not only as partners, but in medium to long term also as leaders of projects, so leading the joint collaboration. These joint collaborations, I think, are really very important. It's not just about getting knowledge and exchanges and moving people. Out of our experience, they really build long-standing partnerships and also change lives. And when we look at research that we have done on this, we often see that people over decades follow each other, have exchanges, and collaborate with each other. So I think the real opportunity lies there in things that we do not really know. and that are probably also a bit difficult to anticipate. It's a bit about serendipity, but give the funding to the institutions and their members, including students. Students are, for me, the members of the institution. And let them develop the issues around the priorities that the institution set. And I agree with Themis that there are, of course, big differences between Africa and Europe, putting into brackets that each Africa and Europe is internally also so diverse. There are differences everywhere. It's all very diverse. But in many regards, we have quite similar priorities. Inclusion has already been addressed this morning. Greening has been addressed, the whole issue of digitalization. I think these are the issues that are important for European and for African universities, and where we can usefully and to mutual benefit also exchange and collaborate. And I think that's very important for our perspective. We see this collaboration really as a two-way learning process. So it's really about learning from each other and with each other. I think that's what I wanted to contribute here. So positive, and I agree with Martina also that hopefully in the next summit, we will play a more prominent role in the summit itself, and not only in its before it and probably after it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gibel. I think that one thing that one key theme that has gone through the initial remarks has been the fact that, especially we do recognize the differences in both continents, yet we should be able to build a partnership that is based on equal respect for each continent, and the ability to recognize that there are issues that require action, and not as in walking our talk, and not just putting the commitments and the statements out there. So quickly, I think that we'll move on to the next round of questions, and for this, I'll kindly ask speakers to stick with the the 4 minutes allocated time, so that we are able to cover all the areas that we have included. So then again, I would want to go again back to Professor Goski-Alabi with this question, that the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us lessons about the deepening inequalities that have existed in education, especially with regards to digital divide. Now, the European Commission indicated that 43% of the adult population in Europe had limited digital skills, and 37% had no digital skills at all. Now, in the African context, it was reported that 89% of learners in sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to household computers, and 82% of them also lacked internet access, and at least 20 million live in areas not covered by a mobile network. Now, the question is, how do we sustain digital education under such circumstances, and how do we close the digital divide, especially within the African continent? And consequently, how do we promote the quality delivery of education through online modes as well? Professor Goski, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Samuel. And I would like to thank Themis and Michael and all the other speakers, also His Excellency Peter, for their presentations. I think that we, first of all, need to have a mindset change about higher education and digitization. We need to realize that it has become a new normal and an imperative, and we aren't going to go back, because we are now in a digital age. And so higher education ought to be digitalized. And if we recognize that we don't have any option than to deal with it, then we'll start making the baby steps towards killing the giant elephant in the room. And so I think that it has to be progressive. It has to be one step at a time, that have to digitalize higher education, not forgetting that the social aspect of education is equally important. So the past research has shown that students are willing, and faculty too, are willing to embrace digital education, but not to do away completely with the physical interactions, because the social aspect is important. Having said that, I think that it's obvious that we need to build capacity. Countries need to invest. We can use our NRANs, the National Research and Education Networks, as a starting point to ensure that we get it firmly grounded. Also, the quality aspects of digital education has been a major concern. So it is another thing that we have to do. We need to prioritize digital education, and until we do that, we cannot move forward. But also to touch directly on the collaborative aspect between the EU and Africa. I would like to say to Michael that I remember 10 years ago, the Europe-Africa Connect project, of which I was a part, started and worked through with it until the end of that project. In terms of recognition, mutual recognition of qualification, are we going to see another stage of the Europe-Africa Quality Connect project, maybe a phase 2? And this time, are we going to consider scaling up from the initial 5 institutions in Africa that we used to a more sustainable approach, so that we can see the synergies that we can create between Bologna and the Addis Convention? Of course, some initiatives had already taken place, like the Tuning Africa, but to what extent had it been scaled up in different institutions in Africa? We've also seen the HAPA project in its phase 2. And the question is, to what extent have we succeeded with the harmonization and also with the synergies or the harmonization between Bologna and what we are trying to do in Africa? Another concern that we have when it comes to digital education and the new trends in higher education is transnational education. And there are some concerns within our African partners that we are going to see some move as we talk about development, equal respect, and the move from the donor approach and concept. We are going to see a transnational education approach from the EU, which would be more targeted towards the commoditization of higher education. And the questions that we need to be asking then would be, how would this affect the indigenous and preserve the culture of the African higher education institutions, as there seem to be the possibility that we are very soon going to see satellite campuses of European institutions in Africa, which might be much more stronger than the African institutions. And when it comes to the ranking, we know that most of the higher institutions in Europe are much more stronger than the African institutions. And these are going to be used as a subtle form of marketing tactic to attract African students into the various institutions through transnational education. Another concern has to do with how we're going to use micro-credentialing, as I have already started reading, that is coming up as a strategy in the EU, as a double-edged sword. First, to build the needed skills that we require in Africa, and to open access to quite a number of people in the critical areas of skills that are required for the 21st century. But also that we are going to use micro-credentialing as another way of undermining some of the gains that higher education in Africa is trying to make. Lastly, to mention the implementation of Erasmus+, particularly when it comes to PhD scholarships, and the past policy, particularly with the Marie Skłodowska scholarships, had been that the beneficiaries need to spend the greater part of the time in Europe. If it is 4 years, then they have to be physically present in Europe. To what extent are we going to see the use of digitalization to ensure a blended approach where part of that time can be spent in the home country for flexibility and also half of the other time in Europe? Lastly, the prioritization of how the mobility benefits are awarded. Who determines which areas of research, which areas of education should be priority, and how do those scholarships get to affect the bottom line of human development in Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Goski. I think that talking about the issues of mobility, the issues also around access to education, quality education, both on the continent and then both on the African continent and then in Europe, are issues that we would still explore ahead of the conversation as well, and also about micro-credentials. I think I'll quickly want to move on to Mr. Koji about saying that a key impediment to equal access to education in Africa has been inadequate funding for public education. I'm also referring to Professor Goski's comment about the commercialization of education. Now, in saying that, what are your thoughts about what state actors from both continents should do to bridge the investment gap for public education? And also, from a student's perspective, what actions can be taken to ensure that Africa is able to nurture and retain the best skill sets and knowledge to facilitate its own growth, as opposed to the rising rates of brain drain?
All right, so thank you very much, Samuel. Education remains a public good. At least that's an understanding that, I mean, we all have. That essentially attempts to commercialize it in a way as to keep people out is one that is detrimental to the fundamental human rights. There's the sense that education must be publicly funded. And that's because if we're seeing it as a public good, then the primary actor should be the state. To that extent, it stands to reason that African governments will have to play a very fundamental role in terms of funding of education. UNESCO puts a certain percentage at 4 to 6% of the GDP of a country should at least be spent on education. Africa is doing something around 0.5, 0.7, 1 to 1.5. And that's like very much below the threshold, the recommended threshold of 4 to 6. And that would mean that there's still infrastructural deficits across. If you ask, how should both of the AU, EU approach this? I would think that the investments that come into Africa, for example, I mean, the loans, the way the conditionalities are put, and the fact that, I mean, African countries are told what directions they should apply the loans. So it doesn't go into the sector that can be a multiplier effect on other sectors. So we all understand that education is one multiplier. And so if you invest in education, you most likely would trigger development around the other sectors. But if you were to take loans that you wanted to invest and the conditionalities are tied such that you can invest them into education, then it means that, I mean, you most likely be putting them into other sectors. And the fact too is that you have a lot of multinationals coming from Europe into Africa. We must, as per the conversations that going on at the AU-EU summit, the multinationals must be held to task. So, for example, if you take a country like DRC, It contributes 70% of the world's cobalt. And the companies that mine them are not African companies. Tesla is not African company, Microsoft and Volvo, these are all not African companies. And yet DRC is one of the poorest countries in the world. For a country that contributes 70% of cobalt to the world, what drives our cars, what powers our laptops, what powers our watches and all of those things, you must see a higher investment in education coming from these multinationals. And again, if you look at, a country like Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire combined, we contribute something around 65% of the world's global consumption of cocoa. And yet these two countries are poor. So Cadbury, Nestle, all of these multinationals, what investments are they making into education? So there has to be the conversation as to require that to the extent that, you're working in Africa and you are taking the resources, you must make investments into education, because it's only when the people are educated that they can have the freedoms and the liberties that arise economically. So that is one way that I think we can do that. And then the second part of the question is asking, what can students do? I think two things that we have already done. So more of even what we're doing than what we can do. So on the Global Compact on migration, and then the Global Convention on the recognition of academic qualifications by UNESCO. On these two, we have start to look at them as student unions. And again, it's all of us coming together. So the European Students' Union, All Africa Students' Union, OCLI from Asia, all the blocks of the student unions globally have come together to make sure that conventions like this that can recognize all of us, our skill sets and our competences at a global level, and to make sure that we can be mobile and to move around in a very respectable manner and a very safe manner. We are already doing that. So we're working so that the countries can adopt and then ratify the conventions. So these are things that as students, we have not started to wait for the conversations to even start, but we think that we also owe a responsibility to ourselves to take up some of these protocols that we know that if they are implemented would go a long way to help us to build the relevant skills that are very competitive at a global level. So I think that on other things too, research has remained very powerful. And we continue to, look at it as a way as to build further the partnerships between the European, Europe and then Africa. And so I think that on the subject matter of research, students can go a lot more into partnerships, look out for the funding that's available for them, and they do it so as to give recommendations and solutions to the problems that beset us. And I don't know, Samuel, are we going to have the opportunity to give a concluding remark, or this ties in?
Yes, so I think that after the question and answers, then we'll move on to the final comments from all panelists.
Okay, so then let me just give up now, and then later we'll give a conclusion.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that comment on that question. And talking about research, I think I'll quickly want to move on to Mr. Gibel. Talking about research, research collaborations and peer learning seem to be fundamental underpinnings in ensuring that we are able to address issues as they are and not necessarily what they ought to be. In that sense, how can we facilitate better collaborations, especially within the space of higher education institutions and students, for increased research that hinges on the need to resolve issues peculiar to both continents?
Yeah, thank you. I get to that. I just thought I'd give some very brief remarks on the previous speakers, particularly on what Koski said about the digital question. And I fully agree. And while the situation in Europe is probably much more favorable, we also discovered in Europe very quickly, and in particular now during the pandemic, that access to digital and skills for digital becomes a new divider. It actually widens the gap that we have in society. And we started to talk about digital poverty and how to address that. And another issue, I think, where we would also have things in common to discuss is that we also become more where we are using digital, but it's a little bit like we start driving around with cars and then suddenly realize that there are so many cars on the road and that we probably need some rules for this. And so that we actually have no proper regulatory frameworks for what is happening, and that this has impacts such as the issue of data ownership, data privacy, but also technological lock-in monopolies, which we have to cope with. So all these issues. And another point that you made is transnational education, which is of course also a concern in Europe, not everywhere the same in all countries, it's in the same way, but we are also generally concerned about it. And also following up on Peter, we consistently make the point about education as a public good and a public responsibility, importantly. And what we have been doing in this regards as EUA, we have consistently followed the trade agreements that the European Union concludes on behalf of the member states, and made sure that there are no commitments that on education, so that education does not become an issue in trade agreements. So that's I think an important point. And then we are also probably mesmerized on the one hand side and worried about the micro-credentials. We don't know much about it and see how that is emerging. And on the one hand side, are looking forward towards more flexible learning, which really helps lifelong learners. But at the same time, we are also clear that it should not replace a full study program, and it should not be so just to say, these are, I think, the issues which we could usefully discuss between African and European stakeholder representatives. The situation will be different, but I think there's a lot to learn from each other. And I think this is what I would also see as an opportunity of what associations like mine or yours can do to support the ongoing exchanges between African and European higher education institutions and the student exchanges that will take place. And so they need frameworks and they are at conditions. And Gorski just mentioned the requirement of the Marie Curie, and that this is probably not a good approach. And what does that mean now that you can also have education digital, online, and so I think that has to be explored, discussed, and we have to talk to the governments about this and give them our view, our vision on how that is done better. And also, when you address the issue, who actually decides about your research priorities or about the content of your curricula, and again, I think this is a constant struggle also in Europe, that on the one hand side, you get your money from the government, but on the other hand, you have to protect the institutional autonomy and the academic freedom in order to decide as a scholar on what is researched and what is taught. So I think this is just to say, this is what I would see as an opportunity. And we had actually the chance to discuss that last week with the colleagues from the Association of African Universities and several others also from the regional associations in Africa, on how we have to learn from each other regarding the national and regional frameworks that we have and get a better agreement there. I think we will become much stronger if we keep each other's informed and help each others to ensure that the frameworks that are put in place really serve higher education and higher education institutions and their members, and are not becoming a gamble for profit. So I think that's my point.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think that one of the key hopes beyond this discussion is to facilitate some sort of partnerships and working together between the organizations that are represented here in this discussion. So thank you so much once again, Michael, for that submission made. Just to quickly say that if you have any our panelists, you can kindly put them in the chat so that when it is just quickly read them out to our panelists in that sense. Thank you. So I would want to, in the final round of questions, I would want to move on to Martina to ask that globally, higher education is becoming increasingly expensive. This only means that a lot more students may not have access to higher education. There also exist other barriers that inhibit learners from having access and limit their participation in attaining outcomes. For migrant students, for instance, there is the issue of comparability of qualifications as being highlighted by Peter and then again Professor Goski. What are some of the measures to be considered in your view by both continents to ensure that we can enhance students and academic mobility? And also what some of the immediate responses expected from higher education institutions to ensure that the equitable access to quality education in Africa and Europe? You have the floor, Martina.
Thank you for the question, Samuel. I'll start off with the first one. When it comes to enhancing students and academic mobility, the European Students' Union firmly supports the call for global convergence efforts in higher education. And we see that the ratification of the Global Recognition Convention as the first and foremost enabler of the right to access high quality and sustainable lifelong learning for all, as well as mobility and internationalization. The European Qualifications Passport for Refugees is another tool that's based on Europe's Lisbon Recognition Convention that enables the recognition of learning in cases when people with migrant background could not carry their qualifications with them. So the tools, the policies, they exist, they are there. What we need to see more is our strategic actions and commitment towards implementing the Global Recognition Convention. And the ball is now in the court of our public authorities and our institutional leaders to engage in continuous policy dialogue in order to reach the most reasonable reconciliation of a diversity of stakeholders' perspectives. Yes, tensions between global convergence and national diversities are expected. So in that respect, in hand with the ratification process, I will also mention research as the other panelists have, but in the aspect of bringing to life evidence between the connection that the convergence in higher education has with national development. And this would be able then to put further focus on how the differences between countries can establish mechanisms of unification. Now, in Europe, despite the Lisbon Recognition Convention, we are seeing that there are some education institutions more globalized than others. And in order to combat this, apart from having the ratification process, the comparative research going on, it is equally important to foster more sustainable organization models for our education systems, where our institutions could have both the financial and capacity building resources that incentivize the development of these models. And this relates to the second question on what are the immediate responses to ensure the equitable access to quality education in Africa and Europe. Student federations all around the world are growing extremely tired of the insufficient attention being given towards enabling education institutions to be more open to diverse groups of students. We have put out calls after calls and repeating the same thing over and over again. Our focus should be on the post-pandemic recovery funds and how they are currently being distributed, and as they are currently being distributed and national budgets are also being drafted, it is essential for us as student representatives to also monitor how much of these funds are being distributed by public authorities, first and foremost to support education institutions in improving continuous professional training for academic and administrative staff for the effective online delivery of learning and teaching methods, taking into account the needs of a very diverse, an increasingly diverse student population, Secondly, that these funds are enabling education institutions to provide effective, accessible, and user-friendly counseling and guidance for students. There are a number of solutions that we need to find for academic issues, for career challenges that are being caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And unfortunately, counseling and guidance is not a priority, and we must make it so. Third is the focus to help the funds to help students ameliorate the negative consequences caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as to provide grants to underrepresented, disadvantaged, and vulnerable students to improve the working conditions and the pays that is being received by our teaching staff. This is the final message that I wanted to make, that it is only if the backbone of our education institutions, our teachers, students, administrative staff, institutional leaders, if it is only if they have the necessary training and support that we can expect them to implement the green and digital transformation of our education institutions, and beyond that, our societies.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Martina, also for that. And I think that we as of now only have one question in the chat, but perhaps we could go on ahead and then do the final comments from each panelist. And then, however, I want to pose this question to the SG for ASU and then to the president of the ESU, while in making your final comments, that from all that we have said, how do we ensure that the proponents of the EU-AU partnership directly benefits students and the young people from both continents in making your final submissions? So before that, I think that I'll take the final submissions from Professor Goski. Then we go on to the final submissions from Mr. Gibel, and then to the SG of ASU, and then to the president of the European Students' Union. We have the floor, Professor Goski. Final comments.
Thank you very much. I think that I would like to thank the ASU and the EUA and ESU for putting together this platform for us to share our views on the EU-Africa partnership and the policy implications of some of the issues that we have raised. It is my belief that what we have shared here would go a long way to influence the forum and the dialogue that would be going on from the 17th. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mr. Gibel?
Oh, I think I don't have much to add to that. I think it's really important about connecting people, and the Erasmus program will do that in multiple ways. So the ball is a bit in our court now on how to let's move from board to card, how to play the cards well. And I think we could think about rules for more balanced, more equitable exchanges. I mean, I haven't heard the word brain drain here today, but I mean, that plays, of course, a role. It plays a role inside Europe. It plays a role in Europe. And I think it plays a role definitely between the continents. So how to cope with that. And then exchange also about the frameworks in which higher education works and functions, and try to take it up from there. That's something that we do in the Bologna process and also in the EU. Europe is, in the end, it's very diverse, and there is not the one model that from the outside, it might look like one model, but in fact, we have many different models, but somehow we make them work together. So in a way, we don't offer you a good solution for anything to adopt, but we offer you, I think, a good display of different ways of how to do things differently and what are the implications. So, and we are happy to share that, be it on QA, be it on recognition, but also of the experiences on digital and how you cope with the issue of public responsibility and the risks of commoditization. So looking forward to that under the new renewed African-EU partnership.
Certainly, awesome. Also, thank you so much, Mr. Gibel. So I'll move on to the edge of the All Africa Students Union on your final comments as well.
Let me thank Prof. Goski. Let me thank Prof. Michael. Let me say a big thank you to Sebastian, GSF, for being a key facilitator. And let me also thank you, Samuel, for moderating this and for running around to make sure that we've been able to get everybody here. I mean, it's extremely difficult. I mean, putting together all of us from different places and all that to have a conversation around an important matter like this. Let me conclude by saying that I think that I have more optimism in our generation than in the present generation, because I do think that, I mean, we have conversations every day with Martina from the ESU, from Oaklife, and we're working together. And for the first time, global students have been able to come together, this time not influenced by either the East or the West, and have built a consortium of student leaders working around issues that affect all of us in a very respectable manner, in a very dignified manner. And I think that it's a show of, I mean, what we can do tomorrow. If Martina were to change tomorrow, I'll fetch her videos and show to her that we've stood on similar things, on the issues of race, on the issues of education. We've stood on all of them and had a common understanding how to proceed on them. If she were to change, or Seb were to change, or any of us were to change, I think that the videos will be there to plug out and show to all of us that, look, I mean, we have told ourselves that we'll be very different and will agree and respect each other. So thank you very much. And I'm sure that the statement is just to join you to call on our members to ask to sign up to the statement. The more people we get to sign up, the stronger the statement will be. So please share an email to the All Africa Students Union, or to the Global Students Forum, or to European Students Union, indicating your willingness to support the statement. And I'm sure that if all of us were to do this, it would amplify it and give it the effect that we need. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And so last but not the least, Martina.
Thank you, Samuel. I have big shoes to fill after all previous speakers have made their final remarks. And I completely agree with what was said. And I want to carry on with the message that Peter was giving to the student representatives following this event. No matter how difficult the situation is getting, or how unfair things are seeming, the work you are doing within your student unions, within your student associations is important, and we need to recruit more. We need more people getting engaged with student politics and in student representation. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, not only on policies, but also on research and advocacy initiatives. And although we might not see the fruits of our labor in 1 month or in a couple of weeks, this is something that is sort of the basis of student representation, that the benefits of what you are doing can sometimes come out years after you have been working on that. As Michael was saying, how he was remembering the first cooperation between ASU and ESU and EUA, I am filled with hope that the future has a lot of prospects if we continue the cooperation that we have between our student organizations and our main stakeholders and partner organizations. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of our speakers, from the Director General, Director General Christophidu, to Professor Goski Alabi, to Mr. Michael Gibel, to Mr. Peter Prisikoji, and then Ms. Martina Darmani. Thank you so much for taking time off your very, very busy schedule to be with us today to discuss this very important issue, which would, of course, make further and better input into the student declaration, which would be disseminated almost everywhere, and also at the EU Summit on 17th to 18th, and also with all of our member unions. And we do hope that, as indicated by Martina and Peter, we do hope that we are able to send in your commitment or your endorsement of the declaration. If you need to engage further on the declaration, You can as well always send an email to any of the student unions. That is from both ends. That is the All Africa Students Union, the European Student Union, or even the Global Students Forum to further engage on the declaration. Once again, and thank you so much also to all of our audience for staying in and also sharing your thoughts about this conversation. Thank you so much for joining in. And once again, my name has been Samuel Saswa Donteng, joining in from Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much. And I wish you a fruitful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.